You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.
Somebody told me I was good in my life. Twice. This race today and dance at the disco. Well, I mean, like a dance with you, but you know, you're not my dream girl or nothing like that.
Are you as good in bed as you are on that dance floor?
Those are what you make it with some of these chicks. They think you gotta dance with them.
He's very good, yeah. He's the best. Hey, man, he's great. He's the king out there.
John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever.
She can dance, you know that? She got the wrong partner, of course, but she can dance.
Okay, listen. I like it. We could dance together. That's it. We could just dance together and nothing more, nothing personal.
Dancing, you can't last forever. It's a short-lived kind of thing. But I'm getting older, you know, and you know, I feel like, you know, so what? I'm getting older. Does that mean like I can't feel that way about nothing left in my life? You know, is that it?
Coming from Paramount Pictures.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me is Mr. Rob St. Mary.
Just do me a favor. Don't touch the hair, all right?
Also with us this week is filmmaker Mark Christopher.
I spend a lot of time on my hair, and he touches my hair.
This week we're lacing up our boogie shoes and looking at the 1977 film from director John Badham, Saturday Night Fever. The film tells the story of Tony Manero, played by John Travolta, a disaffected young man in Brooklyn who dreams of something bigger. He's got a fairly dysfunctional family life, a dead-end job at a paint store, and not a lot of education. The only thing he's really got going for himself is that he can disco dance. And oh boy, can he dance.
I love to watch you dance, Tony.
Oh, yeah?
I love it. I love to watch you dance. I just love it.
Before we get too far into things this week, I want to say that we are going to be getting into spoiler territory for Saturday Night Fever and its sequel, Staying Alive, and Mark's film 54. If you've not seen Saturday Night Fever and don't want us to spoil anything for you, go ahead and turn off the podcast and go watch it. We will be here waiting for you. Now, that said, Mark, when was the first time that you saw Saturday Night Fever, and what did you think?
You know what's strange about that? The thing is, I heard the soundtrack first, and that's my big memory, because I was in high school. It was at or maybe even junior high. It was in my cousin's garage on a farm in Iowa, and he put that record on a turntable, and I was in love. And then it took about 20 years for me to actually see the movie. I think I saw the movie in the 90s, believe it or not, and then fell in love all over again.
I probably saw it years and years ago and totally forgot that it is, as I told you when we did this, we're planning this episode. I think people think that Saturday Night Fever is this frothy little time capsule of disco, and it's not quite as dark and has all the different things that are going on in it, which make it a great film of the 70s. And so when I rewatched it about a year ago, I was like, wow, I don't remember any of this. So my memory was pretty bad. So I've seen it a couple of times since, and I have to say it's deserving of the title, masterpiece of the 70s kind of thing, and that whole era of film that, both of us really love. Like I said, I'm still a little confused that people think that it's, this light and frothy little thing for some reason, I think, in the pop culture.
So this is what was so interesting for me. When I saw the movie, I had the exact same reaction. It is a dark, fantastic movie from the second golden age of Hollywood. It's very much a 70s, smart, deep, thematic, beautiful character drama. It's absolutely beautiful. But, the disco scenes are kind of tacky and dorky, when you see it for the first time in the 90s. So when I was doing research for 54, I remember going back and reading all the old magazines of the day because it was before the internet. So in order to get the jargon of the day and whatnot and do research in general, I had to go back and read old magazines. And in doing this, I read reviews of Saturday Night Fever, and they criticized the movie as a big cliche, but that the disco scenes were absolutely fabulous. So things almost completely reversed. And now just watching the movie again today, they've almost reversed again because the tackiness of those disco scenes is super enjoyable. So I got to say I love them now.
I guess kind of like you, Mark, I grew up with a lot of the music. I remember my cousins having a 45 of Jive Talkin', and I absolutely loved it. And I loved the little, what is the logo for the record label is like that little bull character and stuff. And I'd be like, oh yeah, put that one on. Like before I could even read, I just remember that cartoon character and put this on the turntable. I love this song.
Yeah, I think it's a rhino, isn't it? RSO, isn't that a rhino?
It's some weird animal.
Yeah.
Robert Stigwood's label, because he put out. I remember when I was a kid seeing that because my dad had solo 1970s solo era Eric Clapton albums that were on RSO as well.
I believe this is the first movie it was done on, but I'm almost positive if it wasn't this movie, it was Stigwood who did it either with this or with Grease. He released the soundtrack before the movie, so that was a new invention, and so it kind of makes sense that I saw it first. Also, there was no way to see the movie on a farm in Iowa, but
I want to say, yeah, definitely release the soundtrack and release the single for More Than a Woman beforehand. So that's why that's kind of like the pinnacle moment for the film is More Than a Woman, because they didn't even release Sting Live as a single beforehand, which was kind of interesting because that's the song that we go back to now, in the I can't say the title song, but the title song for the sequel, but the opening credit song, which just blows me away. I saw this film for the first time finally. Gosh, it was probably kind of like you, Mark. I saw it probably early 90s, back when they were doing a lot of student-run film screenings at University of Michigan, and I saw this on a Saturday night, and the whole audience was so revved up for this thing. And when that opening comes on and he's carrying that paint can down the street and you got that music going and all those crazy angles and everything, we were just enthralled. And this was going to be fantastic. And it starts off, as you were saying, and I think the word tacky is right. It starts off so tacky with so many just strange things going on in the whole opening disco scene and everything, and we're still just cheering and cheering. And by the end of it, man, I mean, we were just like somebody punched us in the gut. It was like, oh my God, I didn't realize how dark this movie was because it just goes to some strange places.
Well, let me tell you, I'm glad you gave the spoiler alert because this is a movie, that ends in a gang date rape and a semi-suicide. So it's a dark piece of filmmaking.
Tony Manero he wants to do good, but he really doesn't necessarily know how. I mean, he's got this shitty family. He's got, he's racist, homophobic, doesn't know how to treat women, has nothing going for him, not very smart guy. And I love that, doing research on this, it was when they had another director before Badham. He came in and he was like, oh, well, we got to mellow this character out. And Travolta's like, no. I want to play this like it was written. I want to be this guy, because the way that it was going to happen, they wanted to make Tony into the friendly guy who does favors for everybody around the neighborhood kind of thing. And he's not that guy. He's just out for himself, which I really kind of appreciate.
Right. And then you cast a movie star who's that beautiful and has those beautiful eyes and is so incredibly vulnerable. I got to tell you, I was a little disappointed by just watching it now, because they have done, a remastering and it's HD, and it's just way too frickin' bright. It's a little sad, like especially in the subway scene when he's going to see Stephanie at the end. That should be dark, almost, that green fluorescent thing that the magic is created when you hear How Deep Is Your Love come up. Instead, it's kind of lit up like noon, you know what I mean? So it's kind of a bummer. But the good side of this HD thing is those beautiful sparkling blue eyes. And it even, you love Tony Manero already, but it adds even something more.
For me, just the character and sort of the community that he's around. I know there's a big difference between sort of working class Brooklyn and, East Side factory ranch suburbs of Detroit, but I sort of saw a lot of, if not myself, like the kids I grew up around in that neighborhood, because it was a lot of the same thing. It's just working class, blue collar folks, and they're hung up on all of these things that they're not together enough to figure out. Like, I mean, I heard racist stuff, in my family when I was growing up, from my extended family and the kids I went to school with and all that. So as I was watching this, I'm like, it's fascinating to see really sort of honest blue collar life depicted in a film in that way, because a lot of times it seems that filmmakers kind of shy away from that. You get sort of this, abject poverty, the people that are at the real bottom, and then you get sort of this professional class and up in film, but you don't really see sort of the day-to-day laborers and sort of what their life is like.
Well, that's true. And I have to tell you, that's why I think the movie was such a sensation, because I grew up working class as well. I don't know if you guys know this little bit of history of disco, but if I may, so disco, depending on, did it start in the 60s in Paris, exactly where did it start? But it was really coming to a head in the sort of mid-70s, and then it was on the downswing until this movie came out. And this, because disco was for Black people, Latinos, and gay people in cities. And this movie, and I think it's just what you're saying, Rob, it's because of the working class aspect, so it could appeal to the whole country and the whole world, it made disco enormous.
I'm not old enough to remember the anti-disco stuff, but my uncles would talk about how there were like these anti-disco groups, and like rockers in Detroit had like these fan club cards, like we're anti-disco and all this stuff, because disco, as you said, represented all of this stuff that they didn't like in the first place. Like they couldn't relate to gays, they couldn't relate to other minorities. They were just working class slobs, and they wanted to listen to their Aerosmith albums.
That's absolutely correct. Disco Sucks was really a euphemism for I hate all those fringe groups. Yep, that's absolutely what it was. And Disco Sucks came about 1980, so, disco blew up after Saturday Night Fever because of this working class thing, but then you're right, it was the working class people again that came in to say, we think this sucks. And what's also amazing, I don't know if you guys remember this, but disco wasn't just music, it wasn't just the discos themselves, it was the clothing, it was board games, it was like everything. It was like we haven't had any kind of crazy pop culture mania like that since.
Yeah, we've seen the culture kind of fracture since then, and it just continues to do that. But it's always interesting to me that it seemed like John Travolta was the one who was on the forefront of these things. There was a club in the town that I grew up in, and it was a disco for a while, and then it turned into like a honky tonk with the mechanical bull and stuff. And I was like, whoa, well, there's Urban Cowboy. And then I'm just surprised that it didn't turn into an aerobic center, and be like, oh, perfect. Like it's John Travolta leading the way all the way through.
Well, the aerobics movie didn't do well, did it?
No, it did not. So let's talk a little bit more about the plot of the film, because we've talked a little bit, begins with the shot of the Brooklyn Bridge. And we're going to be talking about the bridge a lot throughout this film. Or is it Brooklyn, or is it it's the Verrazano Bridge, right?
It starts probably with the Williamsburg Bridge. I'm not sure, but if you were in Bay Ridge, you'd take the Williamsburg Bridge into Manhattan. So I think they go across from Manhattan, probably across the Williamsburg Bridge to Brooklyn, or it could be the Brooklyn Bridge or the Manhattan Bridge. All three of them go to Brooklyn. So.
The bridge is just such a symbol in this movie. This whole idea of escaping from Brooklyn and getting out of Brooklyn, and what can Tony do to get out of Brooklyn? And there's a character in there, and we'll talk a lot about her, Stephanie, who has gotten out of Brooklyn, albeit through kind of questionable means, and she's not really even happy about it herself. But the whole idea of getting out of Brooklyn, and we start with Tony strutting down the street, doing his thing, and has this can of paint and everything. We start with him at his paint store, and we see that he's got a really good rapport with all the customers. He's doing very well. His boss likes him. Things are okay there, but when he comes home, his home life is really the first kind of sign that we have that things maybe aren't so peachy in Tony's world. This whole idea, his dad is out of work. He's got this little sister. He's got his grandmother there, this extended family idea, this old Italian family. His dad never says anything good to him at all. His mom has really not that much use for Tony. She's all just completely about his brother, Frank Jr. And of course, I'm just crossing myself over here because Frank Jr. is a priest. He's going to be a priest. He's at the seminary. She thinks the world of Father Frank Jr., but not so much about Tony. And Tony, really, the only thing that he has going for him is this whole idea of getting dressed up and going out to the disco with his friends. This group of guys, I think there's altogether 5 guys, and they call themselves the Faces. And them going into the disco, it's like Moses crossing the Red Sea. Just everybody parts. They come in, and it's like now the party can start.
He's not just great at the disco, he's very good at his little working class job in the paint store. So there are 2 times in his life that anyone has ever told him he was any good.
You know how many times somebody told me I was good in my life? Twice, 2 fucking times. This race today and dancing at the disco. You sure as fuck never did, asshole.
I'm very surprised that he even calls his father an asshole at this point. It's like, really?
I love that. That's fantastic.
I was trying to figure out sort of the age, because obviously Travolta's a bit older than I think the character's supposed to be. And I think the character's like 19 to 21, somewhere in that range.
19, yeah.
And one of the things that I could really relate to, and I think anyone who remembers their teenage years can relate to, is him basically putting the music on and then getting himself ready to go out. And there's this whole sort of like ritual aspect to it. You get this idea, it's like he's got to do this, and he puts the chains on, and he's doing the hair and all that. Well, I was not, a strutting peacock like Tony Manero in my youth. There's just something about going in your room, putting on the music, and like connecting in that way. And it was like, it's just such a, it's just part of your youth in that way. And I think that's another aspect of it, that why it holds up, is that you could show this to a teenage kid today and they go, oh yeah, I totally get that, but it would be my iPod or something, instead of big vinyl records.
We have to talk about Karen Lynn Gorney at a certain point because she was in 54, and she gave me a lot of inside stories about things. I'll try to remember for you guys. But one thing that I may have read this, and you guys may know this, but in that scene where he's getting ready, right? If you notice, when he opens his closet, it looks like he's holding his breath. It's this weird thing. Oh, I know how I know this, because I read the original script, and I can't remember if the original script was called Saturday Night Fever or The Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night, but I read the paper script. I got it out of the library at graduate school, and I read it, and a couple of, obviously not everything ends up in the movie, and one of the things was that this character used to hold his breath and see how long he could hold it, but they cut that out of the film, and so you have these strange shots of Tony getting ready where he looks like he's holding his breath, because he is. The other thing that's really important, and this is about the relationship with the mother, and it's so sad, like he has absolutely no relationship with his mother in the movie. It's kind of freaky. But in the script, he has a really interesting one. He takes her to church, and if I remember right, there are even church scenes, and they're really cool, and it gives him even more character. But obviously I don't know if the scenes didn't work or if they cut them before shooting, but that was something very interesting also that didn't make it to the screen.
Yeah, and they even make reference to that scene because she's asked him to take her to church to make God into her telephone operator. That doesn't necessarily happen on screen. There's a couple other scenes, and it's kind of weird reading about this, the movie. It seems that when it showed on AMC that they added some scenes in there that maybe are on the DVD, but maybe not. The version that I saw watching it for this podcast was the same version I think I saw back in 91, 92. And apparently there's other stuff that's out there. They've kind of re-added some deleted scenes, but it's still not everything. I read that same script, and there's it's still stuff that isn't in there. And then this goes back to the original short story that this was based on, this 20-page thing that was in, I think, the New Yorker. And his father is out of the picture in that, and his father's in jail, and it is all about him and his mom and how much he loves his mom. And so it is kind of strange that relationship just really isn't there when it comes to the movie. And his grandmother is there a little bit, but not very much. And I would think that with this whole idea of the extended family and stuff, that we would get a little bit more of that. But really, they get us out of his house fairly fast after he does his ritual, and then we have the infamous the dinner scene with his hair, which the whole thing with his hair is all ad-libbed, which I didn't realize that yes. There are a lot of great lines in here that are just coming out of Travolta's mind, which I find very admirable.
We just watched the hair. I work on my hair a long time, and you hit it. He hits my hair.
And I didn't realize until the second watch that he's wrapped in a bed sheet because he had already gotten dressed. So the first time watching, I'm like, is that just a bib or something? I'm like, no, he's actually mummified, kind of, except for his head. Yeah.
It looks so great. Yeah. And when his sister throws the meatball at him or whatever, it's just like, hey, what are you doing? It just sets off that whole round robin of people slapping each other. Because his mom is starting to become a little bit more independent and everything. It's this whole idea that the world is changing. What, you're slapping me at dinner, and you're talking about getting a job. His dad is saying all this stuff, and we don't get a whole lot of that stuff, but at least we're getting flavors. And that's one of the things about this movie, is that it's just told in these really kind of more episodic kind of things. And just I like that we don't necessarily get even the beginnings and endings of some scenes. It just feels like we're getting the guts. There's a lot of stuff, especially with his friends, where we're just getting these little kind of snapshots of them, and we don't necessarily get the whole thing. The friends, the faces, it's like some of them are, I don't know, no offense to the actors or anything, but I find them kind of interchangeable. Joey and Double J and Gus, Gus is barely there, but those three guys, to me, they're pretty much the same guy. I don't necessarily get that much of a difference between them. It's really only Bobby C., played by Barry Miller, who seems to be the different character. This little shrimpy guy, And I mean, almost from the outset, he's talking about his girlfriend, and we have this whole thing of him, like we experience his breakdown and his relationship while we're over at 2001 and at the disco and everything, and we don't ever see her. We don't ever get that whole thing, but I like that we get these kind of snapshots as we go throughout the movie of what's going on in his life.
It is such a juicy character drama. Like, every character is so distinct and so rich, as those great 70s movies are, except for the faces. And I think the faces are sort of meant to be interchangeable, except for, as you said, Bobby C. And the one face that is not interchangeable to me is Joey, because Joey has such a great face. Like, I can't believe that he has those big choppers, that beautiful, Matt Damon smile. And I can't believe that guy didn't work more. Maybe he has and I've just missed him, but I loved that face. But I do think that the faces, were probably intentionally meant to be, I mean, they were called the faces, that they were meant to be interchangeable and to not be separate characters, but to be sort of a conglomeration of a character. And I think, really well done.
I also see that in that way they become sort of the sameness. You get the idea that, there's 10,000 of these guys roaming around Brooklyn.
When we get to the disco, because we get a little bit of stuff before the disco, we get them in Bobby C's car. He's kind of the designated driver. He's the only one that owns a car, as far as I know. And they have this whole thing where it's like, Tony is definitely the leader of this group. And we know that right from the get-go, and it's kind of funny because he's the guy who leads them into the club, and he's really the guy that they're looking to for all this stuff. And I never really see the other guys dancing at all. He's the only guy. They go to this disco every weekend, and he's the only guy who's out on the floor. It's like, okay.
Actually, the faces get up and do, I don't think Bobby does, but the other faces get up and do the line dance with him early on.
But they're not doing that solo stuff, man, and that's where Tony just shines.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, and when Tony has that solo number, it's still friggin' great.
You could take this whole disco, this initial disco scene apart and just, write your term paper on this. Just all the relationships that are going on in here, the way that we have, who's speaking to them, who's not, the way that people are looking at them and all this kind of stuff. We have the introduction of all these different characters at this first dance. This is where we see Carolyn Gorney just, off in the distance a little bit, her and her partner, and they're the only ones that can dance to this Latin number. And Tony's really kind of pissed off about this Latin music because it's not the disco that he wants. And then we've got, that whole thing with him and Doreen, this kind of, hanger-on who just loves the way that Tony dances. And
my favorite.
Wiping the sweat of his brow and everything, and they're just like, that's better than a blowjob. You can't get anybody to do that for you. She's just dabbing the sweat off of his brow.
Tony, can I wipe your forehead? I love the way you dance. I just love, I love the way you dance.
My friends and I used to quote Doreen for weeks on end.
For some reason, I used to mash her character and Annette, the Donna Pescow character, together, but they are so different. Now when I see it again, I'm just like, oh yeah, no, there's, Annette is just so out there so immediately, the whole girl of your dreams, why don't you go home and have a nightmare and all this kind of stuff. She's just this kind of, I don't want to say low class, but she definitely has that working class thing that we were talking about, and she wants to be her own person, but she doesn't necessarily know how to do it, and her self-respect isn't as high as it should be. And I love her character, man. She is just amazing to me, and just all the shit that she goes through in this movie. I could have the Annette story, and I'd be just as happy as watching the Tony Manero story, but she is just fantastic.
Yeah, I think the key to Annette, which makes her so fantastic, is that she has balls. So even though she's fucked up, she's got big balls, man. And Doreen doesn't. Doreen is, Doreen's a fan. That's it.
Oh, yeah. I'm so amazed that he gives her a dance.
Why not? It's a gift. You can tell. It's a gift to this young lady who just wiped his sweat.
Basically, it's like a sympathy fuck, but out there on the dance floor.
I grew up around a lot of girls like Annette. They were like my close friends. They were just like these brassy chicks who were trying to figure it out, and they would stand up. to people. You get a mix from time to time with her that, she not only has that, but it's like she doesn't want to have to play that role. At least that's how I feel, is that sometimes it's like, she wants to not have to be so tough all the time and on guard all the time, and maybe just, I don't know, have a relationship with Tony, who seems completely unable to treat her with respect.
And, she also does have those great lines that are filled with attitude, but she's not very good, So she's trying to be sassy, but she's not very witty. So like the thing like, well, then go to sleep and have a nightmare. And the other thing he says to her is then, she says, you going to ask me to sit down? And he says, no, you want to, you'll sit. She said, yeah, but you'd ask me to lay down. Her humor is just a little off.
Yeah, she's one of the boys, but doesn't want to be one of the boys. She's a damn good dancer, too. When she and Tony go out on the floor, that's some good stuff happening.
And then I just felt so bad for her because he picks her to go along and become his partner for this contest, and then they start working together, and then he basically dumps her as a partner for another girl who he thinks is a better dancer. And there's this, why couldn't you just be honest with someone? Why couldn't instead of being kind of a rat, Tony?
Well, and this is what's interesting. This might be one of the little flaws in the movie, because Donna Pescow is clearly a better dancer than Karen Lynn Gorney. So when the characters talk about Stephanie being such a great dancer, you're sort of like, what? But not to take anything away from Karen Lynn's performance, because it is so fantastic. It is filled with surprise. She plays against lines all the time. There's something so special about that performance. And again, tough, vulnerable, a new sort of woman trying to figure out her way who comes through this. And I just think it's such a moving and interesting performance.
I was really glad that I read the script for this, because it really tipped me off a little bit more as far as her speech. And she does this in the movie, but it really didn't click until I read the screenplay, where she will say something incorrectly and then correct herself, especially when she's saying interesting rather than interesting. And right. She does that once in the film, and I was just like, oh, okay, there it is. But having not read that, I wouldn't have necessarily picked up on that. And there's this great scene of when she and Tony finally kind of get together, and they've been negotiating a little bit. She thinks that he's just this greaseball who's come in to, pick her up and everything when they're at the dance studio. And, she really doesn't give a shit about him. She's got her own thing going on, and then finally kind of convinces her, yeah, we'd be good dance partners. They go out and they have coffee, and that scene where she is trying so hard to impress him, and she's so impressed with herself, but you really find out fairly quickly that it's just this smoke screen that she has going up, where she doesn't necessarily even know what's going on, but she has picked up on some of the terminology, she's picked up on the lingo and stuff. She's working in Manhattan, which is for her is really big shit, and working at this agency, and Laurence Olivier comes in, and she talks about how he called her one of the most vivacious, but she mispronounces vivacious. I'm trying to remember.
Well, anyway, he comes in the office, right? So I just do a few errands for him. So he goes around, he tells everybody in the entire office, he says, I'm the brightest, I'm the most vivacious thing in the entire office he's seen in years. You
kind of are picking it up, but you're not 100% there yet. And it isn't until later on in the film where we really get how she is kind of turning into the way that she's turning into, and this whole idea of her trying to put on this new self and get herself out of Brooklyn. Yeah, she's, again, fascinating character, and that we have so many of these great characters in one movie. I mean, nowadays it's like you're lucky if you have a character as interesting as a Tony Manero, and here we have multiple characters where you're just like, wow, I want to know more about this person. And even though Stephanie, she's kind of a bitch sometimes because she doesn't necessarily know how to go about projecting the right self at the right times. She definitely is putting on airs quite a bit, but whatever, that's her thing. She needs to do that in order to move ahead and in order to get across that bridge.
Well, what's interesting about her is she is completely selfish, but this this very selfish character has these moments where she opens up and she looks at Tony, and you can just see that vulnerability again, and that's what I think, Karen Lynn did such a great job, with Badham. According to her, if I remember my stories correctly, so they became very close. And when it came time to do ADR, which for those who don't, that's additional dialogue recording, or what they call looping. So later in the process, when you need, an extra line here and there, Karen Lynn went into the sound studio with Badham to do a lot of the female lines. So for instance, when that woman's on the dance floor early on, and she says, she's dancing with Tony, and she says, kiss me, I just kissed Al Pacino. That's Karen Lynn talking, you can tell. Like she didn't even disguise her voice on that one. But you can start to, if you look at the movie like that, you can see looped lines that don't really belong to people, and you can hear Karen under them. And I don't know what John Badham's voice is like, but I bet if you did, you could find those as well.
And this was her first big role. I mean, this was the one that kind of, her discovery, as it were. She had done other things. She'd done TV series, this kind of stuff, a couple small movie roles. But this was the one, man, where she's right there next to Travolta on the poster. And this put her out there.
And well deserved, yep. I'll tell you something also that I forgot until I was watching this, that Bobby C., Barry Miller, actually auditioned for me for the role of Steve Rubell, so that was kind of a fun moment.
He was so good in this, and I really only know him from this and from Fame. Yeah. And then I was looking at his filmography, and I was like, oh shit, he was in Peggy Sue Got Married and just so many other films where I didn't necessarily remember that he was there. But it doesn't seem like he is still acting. It seems like he might have retired a few years ago or something. So I really tried to find him, but he's got such a, fairly generic name, Barry Miller, that it was really tough for me to find any more information about him. And yeah, like his Wikipedia is pretty empty when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. He really, really good actor. And I'd be curious as to when his last credit is, because maybe he did stop. But
it's so funny, Rob. Like, we have covered so many movies with John Travolta in it, and I wouldn't even think
he's almost up there with Real Don Steele. It's almost like we just pick movies that just happen to have him in it usually.
Between this and Blowout, he fares fairly well, in our podcast. But unfortunately, he didn't come off too unscathed when we did Battlefield Earth.
No, not Battlefield Earth. Sorry.
No. So maybe Urban Cowboy will have to do one of these days or something.
Grease is another brilliant thing. And what a great star reveal when we first see him. I remember, little closet kid with my friends in high school at the drive-in. His introductory shot in the movie is turning around with a cigarette in his mouth, I believe. And you just go, and I think I literally gasped.
Our friends over at We Hate Movies just did Look Who's Talking 2. I don't think we'll be covering that one anytime soon on the podcast, though.
No.
We've got the dance contest introduced. We've got John Travolta, we've got Tony Manero, and we've got Stephanie practicing, going through their stuff. And throughout this, we also have some other things that are going on. We've got Tony working at the paint store. We've got the faces and what they're up to. We've got what I remembered as being a much bigger thing, but it really only lasts for a couple scenes. This whole idea of Frank Jr., Father Frank Jr., quitting the seminary, coming back, and the family is just devastated by him leaving the seminary. And this could have been the movie, could have been this whole relationship with the brothers and all this kind of stuff, and how at one point his mom accuses Tony of saying something to Father Frank Jr. to get him to leave the seminary and all this stuff. He is just such the black sheep when it comes to this. And it's really only like 2-3 scenes, and we don't have a whole lot more. And we get to the one of the nice things is that we've already gone to the disco, And then we go back to the disco with Father Frank Jr., and he gets to experience what Tony is experiencing, and being with the faces and all this kind of stuff. Very awkward for the faces, and they keep calling him Father, and this is really where we get the introduction of, we've already had Barry Miller, Bobby C, talking about his girlfriend, and now this is the revelation that his girlfriend is pregnant, and this is going to carry throughout the rest of the film. This whole thing with Father Frank Jr. coming back in and all this stuff, I mean, like I said, this could have been a movie unto itself, but instead he's only there for a few more scenes and then he leaves the film. And I so many great little moments that comprise this film, and just like that whole exchange with Father Frank Jr. and with Bobby C. I mean, that is great dialogue, and just the way that he immediately knows what's going on, and just how upset Bobby is, but really nobody gives a shit. He's amongst friends, quote unquote, but nobody's helping this guy out. Nobody really cares at all about his problems.
Well, the thing also about Father Frank Jr.'s story there is that, again, what a perfect time capsule, because it was really capturing what was going on at that time. And it was a time when you automatically went to church and people were starting to stop going to church automatically. So his story kind of reflects that. In the 70s, there was this drifting away. And I think it's beautiful how they do that in a couple of scenes.
I blame The Exorcist, personally. Let's talk a little bit about this whole idea of Gus. I mean, I talked about how we have the faces, and they're kind of interchangeable, at least to me. And we've got the one guy, Gus, and it took me the longest time to even realize, because I saw, like I said, I saw this on a Saturday night, years and years ago. Maybe I'd had a few Coca-Colas beforehand. I'm not really sure. And we've got this whole thing where we see Gus carrying home these groceries, and then it doesn't become something that we see on screen. It becomes something that we hear via dialogue, is that Gus was jumped by these guys, these Puerto Rican guys. So we're playing up the whole idea of the race angle and everything, because we do have one scene earlier on, which it makes my skin crawl. This whole scene where the faces are walking, and Gus is still with them at this point, and they see these two gay guys coming towards them, and just the way that they start making fun of these two guys, it really makes my skin crawl with them, doing this. And in the script, there's a little bit more of them bashing them, and luckily it's not a physical bash, but they're just like, oh yeah, you don't kill a queer on Sunday because they'll go right up to heaven or something like that. It's just like, oh man. And one of the other signs where you're just like, yeah, these guys aren't as progressive as I would really hope that they were, but it's so true to them, And so when Gus gets jumped by these, what he says are some Puerto Rican guys, they're just like, oh, these grease balls, we're going to get these guys. They figure out, or they think they figure out who it is that jumps him. And then throughout a few other scenes in the film, we see them kind of stalking this gang that is in the neighborhood, and then eventually it blows up and becomes this whole thing of them going out and having this fight. And it's just so weird to me that they do it like the night before or the night of. I don't even know. I think it's the night before the big dance contest, and Tony doesn't give a shit. He goes into the dance contest with his face all cut up and stuff, and it's like, man, you would think you would wait, but no, it was much more important for them to go out and get these guys that got Gus, and then they go to the hospital, and Gus is like, yeah, I'm not even sure it was those guys. And just that, it's just another one of those times in this movie where you're just like, oh man, just another heavy weight kind of hitting your shoulders. It's like, these guys they can't win at all, and they trying to do the right thing in their minds of defending their friend. He doesn't even know if it was these guys at all.
These are guys, full-fledged characters who are incredibly imperfect and full of isms and phobias, and again, seeing that in the 90s, it's such a bummer when they're gay bashers. It's so hard to get through that and get over that. But now that things have gotten better for us folk, you can kind of take it. It's a little easier to take. because you can see where they're coming from, their ignorance and et cetera, et cetera.
Because we get that right off the bat when it's like, I don't want to hear this Latin music at the club and blah, blah, blah. And, and it's like there's so few black faces that are in the club. It's unusual to see any people of color like in this world, even though they're in Brooklyn, which is kind of funny to me now when I think about, the melting pot of Brooklyn. But it's just they are so like white straight people only, please. And they get so offended when anybody of any other color comes into their club, comes into their space, and comes into their neighborhood. They just don't want it.
Well, and I think that's what's important, and this is very important about Brooklyn, and not now that Brooklyn's rich and fancy, but that Brooklyn of that era, very much your neighborhood. And so Bay Ridge is Italian and, believe it or not, Norwegian. So those are the two people that are there, Italians and Norwegians. So if, they obviously didn't get into the Norwegian thing. However, I've been to the Norwegian Day Parade there many times, so I can tell you that. But it is very much an Italian neighborhood. So if you're not that, you're not welcome. And that nightclub, I remember going to that in the late 80s or early 90s, and you couldn't even get – at least we couldn't figure out how to get there by subway, but we went, we had to borrow a friend's car, and we went to this place, and it still had the same people in it. And it had that same dance floor that lit up. It was kind of amazing.
I just saw that there was an NPR story about that dance floor, that there was this whole legal fight about the dance floor.
The lighted dance floor where Travolta strutted his stuff is at the center of an odd custody battle now, as Dina Temple Roston reports.
The beat is immediately recognizable, a staple that is a theme song not just for a movie, but for the disco age. What a difference 3 decades makes. Today, memories of Saturday Night Fever have been largely reduced to John Travolta's white suit, now in the Smithsonian Institution, and the lighted plexiglass floor of the 2001 Odyssey, the Brooklyn club where Travolta showed the world he could dance.
Come on, Tony, dance!
That floor is at the center of a bitter court battle in the Kings County Supreme Court, as 2 businessmen, Vito Bruno and Jay Rizzo, tangle over who owns this piece of disco history.
Real quick, before we get to the very, very end of the film, the one thing that I wanted to point out that I alluded to earlier was the whole scene with Stephanie where Tony goes in, he wants the afternoon off, he quits his job, goes across the bridge with Bobby C, or uses Bobby C's car, I should say, and helps Stephanie move. And to find out, well, one, that she has this kind of quasi-boyfriend, but to find out the relationship that she has with this boyfriend, very interesting to me. And that seems to be like, because he's also putting her down. Like the way that she puts other people down for being ignorant, he's definitely doing that, but in a much more passive-aggressive way. This whole idea of like,
Hey, I read that book you told me to, the...
Her or the Lawson?
The car.
Should have read the Lawson.
It's just like, oh man, he probably tears her down all the time. So that to me is a great scene and kind of shows where Stephanie's coming from a lot of time. But yeah, going to the end of the film, the big dance contest. You would think that the dance contest is going to be this huge thing. We've been talking about it. We've been working towards it all movie. This is going to be the pinnacle of this film. And the dance contest, it is fantastic to watch. These dancers are amazing, but it's not the end of the movie. And it's also one of these great moments in this film where things don't go the way that you think they're going to go. When the third couple gets up there, we see 3 couples dance, and they come in for second, third place. You would think maybe we get a few more couples, but no, that's not the case. We get the third couple up there, and they're dancing to this Latin music that I've talked about before. They're dancing to this song. They're doing an amazing job, and Tony knows it. And he just either he really thinks that they're better than he is, and he and Stephanie are, or he just is in such a place where he doesn't feel like he is number one anymore. But there's this whole thing, man. This is where Tony just decides to break with everything and says, these guys are better than we are. This whole contest is rigged. They're not going to give it to outsiders. And He even gives them the trophy and the prize money and storms out of the club after he berates everybody around him for basically lying to him. And he, even my friends are lying to me. They don't have the balls to tell me that these people are better than I am.
Well, I think it's very clear that they are better. It's so obvious that they're so much better, and that he's the only one willing to admit it. I think Badham did a great job in making that clear.
This whole thing, man, because it's right around here, too, that we go back to the bridge. We've had them on the bridge before, and the way that the friends go to this bridge and they, laugh and they joke around and all this kind of stuff. Oh, and this is also, this is like the end of this movie is just jam-packed, and it's like, oh my God, all this stuff is happening so quickly and just one thing right after another, because this is also where we get Annette coming back into the story. She's been there throughout it, and she's trying to, get with Tony throughout the entire film. She finally just says, fuck it, and lets all of the faces, except for Bobby C, of course, all of the faces have sex with her. And it just, oh man, one of the most uncomfortable moments in the entire film for me is them having sex with her in the back seat. And especially when she starts crying. Tony's right there. Tony is, she's looking at Tony while she's getting banged by these other guys. And it's just, just tears my heart out. And I forgot to mention that there's a potential rape scene in here with Tony and with Stephanie, and him trying, this guy, like you said, Rob, at the outset, this guy is homophobic, racist, tries to rape this girl. It's just like, this is our hero, this is prime 1977 film,
light and frothy fun.
Oh, yeah.
Which I would love to see the G-rated cut of this, because when I was doing the research, I guess the R-rated version went out. It was so well received that they decided to cut down to a G version and put that out as well. And I'd love to see what they cut out of this thing.
Yeah, I've never tracked down the PG-rated version of this, but I do talk a little bit about that to John Badham when we get to the interview section. So yeah, it's just I can't imagine. And for me, it was probably knowing how things were in the 70s. They probably eliminated like a couple F words, and that was about it. Maybe, probably not even Bobby C when he falls off the bridge.
Date rape. Kids like date rape. Come on.
Kids love it.
There you go.
Well, that's what really struck me about the screening it today, was that it really is like a roofie. It's not exactly a roofie gang date rape, but it kind of is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because that's the other thing that we haven't mentioned is the drug use. There's drug use throughout this entire film, and whenever he gets in the car with the faces, they're like, oh, we got these drugs and this drugs. And yeah, they're giving Annette drugs towards the end. She's
driving and drinking at the same time. They're just drinking right out of the bottle as they drive. I'm just like, what? Yeah.
And they smoke cigarettes. That's an X rating right now.
Can you imagine, like when you see the trailers now, where they have the MPA green band and it says, for rated R for these reasons. It's like that box would be huge. Just all of the stuff that would be in there.
And for me, the screenplay does this a little bit better as far as the end of the film. It feels like the script is really tight when it comes to the way that things are just building, because I've mentioned so many things that are happening right in a row, and that just is leading Tony down this whole, what the fuck is going on kind of thing. And it goes even further, I think, with the script, and it almost felt like I couldn't turn the pages fast enough as I'm reading this. And his whole thing where he's on the subway and he's going from, they don't necessarily show it as well as they might have, but he's going from car to car to car, just like going on different subway lines, has no idea which way he's going, like literally and transportationally. And it's this whole idea. One of the things that's in the script and I know that they shot this because it's apparently in one of the versions, is that they do show his father get his job back. Like there's a call from the employment office or whatever, and he's going to get his job back, which makes it a little easier, I think, for us to accept that he's just going to leave Manhattan. He's going to leave his family. So take that as you will. I don't know if it makes it better or worse that we know that his father's going to get his employment back, but Tony is just done. He's done with everything. Goes to Stephanie's apartment, and just talk about one of the strangest endings. It's like rather than them ending on the dance floor with him holding up the trophy or something like that, it ends with such a quiet moment of him getting back into Stephanie's life, talking with her, and them agreeing to be friends. And boop, freeze frame, end movie. It's like, what the hell just happened?
That's why I think it's such a beautiful, beautiful, smart movie that has aged so well, though, because thematically, this crazy movie that's drug use, sex, dance, music, date rape, suicide, teenage pregnancy. We didn't mention that one. It's all of those things, but ultimately, all the movie is about is how a macho young man learns how to be friends with a girl. That's what the movie's about, and it's beautiful. That simple thing, and it's that beautiful shot of their two hands coming together, which I must say in the remastering is really gorgeous. That often is a cliche, and I do not like that in movies, but is done so artfully in this movie. And even the phrase freeze frame I kind of like because it's so 70s, and I do a little homage to that myself. But it really is, if you think about the movie, how does it start off? It starts off on his feet and on him hustling a girl, treating women like meat. Women are there to be fucked for Tony Manero, right? And in the end, he learns to be friends. She says, "You think you can be friends with a girl, huh?" And he says, "Yeah, well, maybe." And that's quite a that's the big arc that this character goes through internally, I think.
All right, we're going to take a break and play an interview with the director of Saturday Night Fever, John Badham.
Your second feature film, I should say, was Saturday Night Fever. Mm-hmm. And it was such a huge hit. I mean, I don't think people really understand these days how big of a film that was. What was the expectations going into this? Did you have an inkling that it was going to be what it ended up being?
No. Maybe only Robert Stigwood in his dreams as the producer, as a very, optimistic, positive thinking producer, was thinking that it would be big. But it was an extremely low budget, $2.5-3 million picture that was kind of a placeholder for John Travolta while he was waiting to start Grease. And it was this terrific article that had appeared in New York Magazine, and Robert Stigwood bought it. He had already made a contract with John Travolta to do Grease, a 3-picture contract, and he said, "Oh, this article would be great. We could make a movie with John while we're waiting for Olivia Newton-John to become available to shoot Grease. So, yeah, we can do it if we can do it for no money." And that's how it started. And I was having a great time with it. I loved the music the Bee Gees had demoed up for it and written, and I really loved the script. I mean, it's just so seldom you ever read anything that just gets you the first time through. And this was one that got me out of my sick bed. I mean, I was in bed with 101 fever or something like that, and and my agent sent it over and said, "Don't read this. They want you to do this, but don't read it till I make a deal." Well, of course, I started reading it right away, and like an hour and a half later, I'm feeling all better. I'm going, "Oh my God, this is great! I can't believe I get to work on this." And at that point, I hadn't even heard any music, and didn't even think of it as something that was, a musical, kind of a new form of musical. I just was entertained by the characters and the story and the whole world of that. And this from a kid who grew up in Alabama and was born in England and had never been to Brooklyn in my life. But it was so universal that it spoke to me, obviously it spoke to other people as well,
It's really almost Shakespearean with the whole Romeo and Juliet, the divide between the classes and the groups I kind of really appreciate that about the film.
Yeah, it's the class structure is definitely there, very subtly understated. I mean, Norman Wexler was a genius, and if you went back and you read the original magazine article, you'd go, well, that's a nice article, but I don't get the characters, I don't see the story, I don't see the movie. You'd have to be a novelist, just kind of starting from, just a very vague suggestion of an area. And Norman, just miraculous.
I was a little too young to see that at the theater when it came out, but then wasn't it actually recut from an R to a PG at one point so more people could see it?
That was the theory. The R rating was going great guns. I mean, it was doing $1 million a day for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, it just went on. And in the theater near my house, it ran for 6 months. The only film in there, just kept running and running and running. So the marketing guy said, well, gosh, the kids can't see this. Of course, they were getting in. The kids were getting in anyway, which was the great thing. They were, people were taking them in. Their parents were taking them, or they'd go up and get somebody to buy tickets for them. And the theaters weren't that fussy about the 17 rule. But nevertheless, I think within 3 or 4 weeks of the picture being released in its original release, they said, we should make a PG version. And I had said to Robert Stigwood at the time I was shooting it, I said, I should shoot some coverage just for television's sake, because this language will never fly on television. And no, don't worry about that. We don't care about that. And I just did it anyway, because I knew. I just knew. And I'd been doing enough television to know, what was allowable and what was not allowable. And if I just took a few minutes here and there, I could cover it and make my life easier. And sure enough, we cut out all the profanity. I said, I'll do this cut myself, because if anybody's going to mess with it, it should be me. I only have myself to kick around. So it's got to be done. Okay, let's not complain. We'll just do it. So we cut all the profanity out. And my editor looks at me and says, well, we just cut 12 minutes out of the movie. You go, oh, my God, that's how much stuff there was in there. And the television coverage that I had done, interestingly enough, not only worked fine, but in some cases the performances were better than the stuff with all the profanity in it, because we'd usually do them as one of the last takes. Okay, do it again, but cut out all the fucks. And and the guys would kind of throw it away. They sort of disrespected it and didn't care. And I thought, oh, this is stupid. And it actually relaxed them. And a lot of those performances are actually in the R version. When that PG version finally came out, it was almost 9 months later, I think. It didn't do any business. By that point, it was everything was over. And the movie had done its deal, and a re-release, nobody cared. So it really was actually the foundation for the television version that's been running for all these many years. And for a long time, until HBO and Showtime came along, you couldn't see, the full original version anywhere else. It does get you. Those characters just get you, and John's performance is just electric, and I mean, it was not a hard job of directing. It was not like I was out there killing myself trying to drag performances out of people. I mean, he understood that character brilliantly, and I had opted for a kind of very quasi-documentary, realistic style on it, and it just seemed to go together really, really nicely. Hard work, but not tough, and every day I would thank God for how good he was.
Were you asked to come back for Staying Alive?
Mm-hmm. I was, and I was excited about it, and I read the Norman's second script, and all the humor of the first one seemed to be gone, and it seemed to have gone into a much kind of darker place, and it just didn't talk to me, and I didn't get it. And Robert Stigwood said, "No, this is what we want to go with," and by that point I knew how tough he was and how stubborn he was, and so I wasn't going to get in and have a big argument with him, and I just felt like not my cup of tea. So I said thank you and stayed away, and then when I heard Stallone was doing it, I thought, well, hey, that's a good idea. Look at that, something fresh, and bring a whole different thing to it, and took it fine. Let it be the way it is.
Thanks to Mr. Badham for joining us, and you can hear the rest of that interview over at our website, projection-booth.com. He was on recently talking about a book that he wrote related to directing and filmmaking. Now, before Saturday Night Fever was a movie, there was a short story in The New Yorker written by a rock writer, Nick Cohn, called The Tribal Nights of the New Saturday Night, which was passed off originally as solid reporting, as nonfiction, and it appears that was not the case.
Not the case, no. Kind of just made it up. Yeah, it kind of came clean quite a few years later. I don't like that it wasn't real, but, in this era of web journalism, it's kind of typical.
Well, as we say, never let the facts get in the way of a good story, right?
And I like how he even puts himself in the story so often and just kind of puts himself there on the scene with this guy, Vincent, who is going out to the disco late at night.
Oh, Vincent Vega?
Exactly. Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah. There's a lot of similarities here and there, but I would say that it changed quite a bit. I mean, it's 20 pages maybe? I threw it into Google Docs, and it's 20 pages. So it's not that long of a story. And there's some, similarities as far as, the name of the club is still 2001 Odyssey. They're not necessarily called the Faces, but there's a line about, Vincent was the best dancer in Bay Ridge, the ultimate face with a capital F. He owned 14 floral shirts, 5 suits, 8 pairs of shoes, 3 overcoats, and this one is interesting, and he had an appearance on American Bandstand. Otherwise, there's a couple things here and there, but it's not that similar.
So this gets taken, and then you obviously being the reader, because, as we know, I have this horrible issue when it comes to reading, you also read Norman Wexler's screenplay. So how do you see it as him taking this short story and then turning it into the film? Like what's in there? I mean, is it, okay, it's the guy, it's the disco, it's the peacock angle, I guess, getting all dialed up. So those are the main things, or do we find that sort of, as we were talking about before, like that working class, everyday misogynist kind of stuff?
I can see him being this kind of the same character when it comes to this. I mean, really, the stuff that I talked about earlier as far as Tony going out and finding that Puerto Rican gang that screwed up, that messed up Gus, that becomes really kind of in 20 pages, there's not a whole lot of stuff. It's just kind of more like, here's this scene that's going on, here's this other scene. So it's very similar to what Wexler ended up doing with the structure of the screenplay. And it ends with them, going out and trying to get these guys. There was this guy who messed up somebody's sister, and so they're going to go get this guy, this vigilante justice kind of thing. So it's kind of like that. There's no real, like, the dance contest, any of this kind of stuff, but there is this whole idea of this character Vincent is not necessarily appreciated, but he can dance really well, and there's talk of the music and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, Wexler really took this and changed it into something a lot more full. It had even though it has this kind of episodic structure, it does have a structure, and we get all these multiple stories being told and moving ahead as we go through the Saturday Night Fever. I mean, we get some that get introduced and then eventually end, like the Father Frank Jr. kind of thing. But then we have other ones that, will carry us through, like the whole idea of Tony's relationship with Annette, or, the Bobby C's relationship with the girlfriend and his whole problem, or Stephanie and all these things. But there's not necessarily like a Stephanie character in the story. So it's much more Wexler taking a 20-page short story and breathing completely new life into it. And then also, it's interesting because the Wexler story, it's very similar to what we end up with on screen, but there's no music. And the music and the dance, you can't necessarily say, like, and then Tony starts to do this kind of Russian dance and it looks really cool. That's not in the screenplay. So it's interesting to take away the music, which was so important to the film, and take away the dancing and just have it be, straight black text on a white page. So it reads a lot different than the final product.
The one thing that's interesting about Norman Wexler, when you look at his credits, was before he wrote Saturday Night Fever, he wrote Mandingo, which was an adaptation, obviously, of a book, and co-wrote Serpico. And this is where it connects to the original director, was he wrote the screenplay for Joe, which was the first film that put John G. Avildsen on the map, which would eventually do Saturday Night Fever. So until he got fired.
It's interesting when it comes to Joe, because I think I made mention of this before on the show, or maybe I didn't, but one of the guys who was involved with Joe was the same guy who directed Galaxina and The Incredible Melting Man, William Sachs, who the rumor has it that he went in and kind of helped save Joe, that it was a much different movie at one point, and he went in and helped re-edit the entire thing and change it into the movie that it is. Now, we'll be talking to Mark later on as far as editing of movies and changing of movies when it comes to that, but I haven't seen the original version of Joe, and so I don't know if that would have been a better movie, but apparently it was a very different movie, and the movie that came out was very popular.
I mean, all I know about it, I saw it once years ago, and all I know is it's Peter Boyle in the lead. And this is, Peter Boyle came on my radar when I was a little kid because my dad was a huge Mel Brooks fan, so I saw Young Frankenstein so many times. And then also, I think it may be the first film role for Susan Sarandon.
I think you're right, yeah. And yeah, Peter Boyle, definitely saw him a lot in Young Frankenstein. And then when I got into Scorsese and saw him in Taxi Driver, I'm just like, that's the same guy. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Why don't you go out? Why don't you go out and get laid or something? That's what you need to do. He's got that speech with Travis where he's like, you're just too wound up, man. Go relax.
Wizard. Wasn't that his character's name?
Yeah, Wizard. Yeah, he's another taxi driver.
So good. Yeah, and Avildsen was on the film, and he was all set to go. He was coming off of Rocky, and apparently he got the news of being nominated for an Oscar for Rocky on the same day that he got fired from Saturday Night Fever.
Well, at least there's balance.
Yeah.
At least it wasn't like, oh, my dog died and the car broke down and I also got fired. But it's like, oh, I got nominated for an Oscar. I got fired from this other gig. Okay, well, I guess that balances out. Which he eventually went on to win, director in Best Picture for Rocky. And there's one last little piece of that carryover of John G. Avildsen in Saturday Night Fever, and that's the Rocky poster in Tony Manero's bedroom.
Yeah, which is amazing. I think you and I were talking about this before the show, is just the whole idea that being able to put a poster from another studio's catalog into your film, you just don't see that these days. You're not going to see a Paramount poster in a Universal film unless they're doing a co-production.
Yeah, it was, well, I mean, it was Universal. No, it was United Artists to put out Rocky, and Paramount put out Saturday Night Fever. So it wasn't like, okay, go into the Paramount poster closet there and pick out a poster that's going to work for this film. No. It's like, we'll put the Rocky poster in there.
So Avildsen was riding high. Norman Wexler, the screenwriter, he was riding high. He had done Joe, co-writes Serpico, and then Drum and Mandingo as well. And then apparently he was just like the script doctor that you go to when it comes to all this stuff. Like, it's one of these things where the guy's got 6-7 credits on IMDb, but he was an active working writer for years and years and years, and the guy that you go to have your script fixed.
So he was sort of the John Sayles of the 70s, and I'll do it, but you don't put my name on it kind of thing. They pay you not to take a credit kind of deal.
The one thing that I always say to screenwriters when we have them on the show is just how difficult it is to gauge what they're doing or what they've been up to, because so many of them never get credit for anything. It's just they come in, they do rewrites, they do an initial draft, they get arbitrated out, whatever it is. Yeah. So you never know. I mean, talking to Ed Neumeyer on RoboCop, it's like, oh, so you've written like 3 screenplays in your entire life. No, he's done a lot of stuff.
Or they get paid to write something that never gets produced. So it's like, yeah, I got thousands of dollars for that thing, but they didn't bother to film it. It's sitting in a closet somewhere. It's on someone's shelf.
So bizarre.
The other thing that was interesting, we were doing a little research on Norman Wexler, was supposedly he was the inspiration for Tony Clifton.
There's a great clip on the WTF with Mark Maron podcast where is Bob Zamuda, who we all know is Andy Kaufman's friend, talking about working for Wexler and just what a nut Wexler was and the lengths that he would go to get quality dialogue from people, and just the stories that go on with this, and just how abusive this guy was. And it does sound like he really kind of helped fuel the Tony Clifton persona.
Which I've always loved Tony Clifton.
Yeah, Clifton is an interesting character. It took me a long time before I kind of got into him, but after a while, I think as I get more older and cynical, Clifton is more appealing to me.
Yeah, that's good. Well, the thing that's funny is our good friend Uncle Lloyd Kaufman, who runs Troma, before he went full-time into making his own films, we've discussed this before with him. I think it was mostly on the Toxic Avenger episode where he talked about his early career and working with John G. Avildsen. Lloyd worked on Rocky and then was part of the Avildsen team that came over to work on Saturday Night Fever. And I spoke recently to Lloyd about this. So let's take a break and play an interview with Lloyd Kaufman, who is the location executive on Saturday Night Fever, after these important messages.
Let me ask you a question. Are you getting enough? I bet you'd love more, right? Well, AdamandEve.com wants to give you more with 10 free gifts. First, you'll get a sexy surprise for her. Second, a specially selected toy for him. And third, a little something we know you'll both enjoy. Plus, you'll get 6 full-length adult movies on DVD. And number 10, free shipping on your entire order. So what do you have to do to get your 10 free gifts? It's not hard. Just go to AdamandEve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy, sexy piece of lingerie, or anything you desire. Just enter offer code BOOTH at checkout, and you'll get all 10 free gifts. Go check out AdamandEve.com today. Select one item and get 10 free gifts, including free shipping when you enter offer code BOOTH. That's BOOTH at AdamandEve.com.
It was a childhood corrupted by endless hours of VHS rentals.
We're sick, demanded this. You'd love it.
In his most formative years, he had seen it all.
I can handle anything.
Action.
Karate is not to be used aggressively. But if I have no other choice.
Horror. And romance. Now, he's decided it's time to go back. For just one more adventure.
Humans are such easy prey.
Noel Meller presents...
You're the problem, you little shit.
The Adventures in VHS Podcast.
Join me, Noel Meller, as each month I take an in-depth look at one movie from my collection of ex-rental 80s VHS classics and speak to one or two of the people involved with making them about what the format means to them.
The Adventures in VHS Podcast.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Download today from iTunes by searching for Adventures in VHS or visit adventuresinvhs.com.
We are the Popcorn Poops. My name is Dustin.
And my name is Jessica.
And together we produce Popcorn Poops, the best married couple movie commentary track podcast on the internet.
Join us each week as we take turns picking films and then watch and discuss them together. If you're at home or with a computer or device, you can sync up the movie and watch it right along with us.
However, you don't have to sync up the film to enjoy the show. Feel free to tune in like you would to any other podcast.
Please visit us on the internet at www.popcornpoops.com.
Again, that's www.popcornpoops.com.
When I first met you, you had your first book out, All I Need to Know About Filmmaking I Learned from the Toxic Avenger, and one of the things I learned from that book was your early years, and I remember was just sort of amazed by sort of the good luck and hard work that you had when you first started working as an assistant to John Avildsen. And one part in there that I wanted to ask you about was about Saturday Night Fever. And do you remember when that project came up and how that started to come together? Because I know he got let go from that picture, but you were part of that crew and you continue to work on it.
When John Avildsen informed Mr. Stigwood that Lloyd Kaufman would be part of his posse, I think that Mr. Stigwood immediately removed John Avildsen from being the director.
Somehow I doubt that. Maybe today, but not back in 1977.
Sounded funny to me, and it's probably had something to do with it. I was brought on to be the location executive because I had worked for John Avildsen on Rocky. And he's a great guy and a brilliant director, Oscar winner, and a big influence on my oeuvre, as we say. And so he brought in Norman Wexler to write the script, and Norman Wexler was the guy who wrote Joe, which was Avildsen's initial brilliant movie, and again a movie that would have been garbage if John Avildsen had not brought in Norman Wexler to write it. Joe is all John Avildsen and Norman Wexler. It has nothing to do with what the original project was. And I think a lot of that was true because of John and Wexler on Saturday Night Fever. And in fact, I know it's true. And then disputes arose, and Avildsen, I think Avildsen, in other words, if I were going to produce a movie with a guy who just had directed the Oscar-winning movie Rocky, a very small movie that took over the world, not just the so-called Hollywood, the nothing. They took over the whole world. And Stigwood's going to question John Avildsen? Fuck him. But unfortunately, Robert Stigwood was the boss. I would have I'm auteur director. I believe in total freedom for the director. It's the director's event. Boy, under those circumstances, I would have let John G. Avildsen bring in an elephant to dance if that's what John G. Avildsen wanted.
Do you remember what some of the issues were, why they were at odds? Or?
Well, I've mentioned it in my book, and I think John also gave me some input on it, and I think it's in the book. But honestly, I don't quite recall. All I know is that it was, in the fullness of time, what a mistake. On the other hand, they brought in a brilliant director who is terrific. And, boy, was that a stroke of luck. Whoa, the dice in their favor. because John Badham is great. He's, you look at his body of work, it's terrific. So, I think they rolled some good dice in that case, but they shouldn't have dumped Mr. Avildsen. In fact, I was just a lowly location guy. It's in my book. I sent Stigwood a telegram saying, "Urgent that I speak with you. Urgent." I didn't say what, and then he agreed to meet with me, and I told him, you ought to really, this is crazy. You should think about this. And he was very nice. I have to admit, he was very, very nice. But he still went through the dirty deed. And then I asked Avildsen, what does he think I ought to do? And he said, well, you probably ought to ride the horse because you'll learn a lot. And it could be a life experience. And indeed it was. The whole thing was a life experience. And once again, John G. Avildsen gets it right.
So you were brought on, you did locations. Did you help scout and find places? That was what you were doing?
I was if you look at the end credits carefully, and I have a half-screen credit, which is pretty damn good for Newton. I was the executive in charge of locations, so I was responsible for not just acquiring the locations, but certain stipulations that went along with them, and also the when you, for example, John Travolta's house, it wasn't just the house that had to be organized, but the street and then the neighbors had to be in on it because we might want to put lights in their windows or either maybe put people on their roofs or God knows what, or park trucks in their driveways or generators or whatever. So it was kind of like running for Congress, and it was quite a challenging experience to say the least.
And Mr. Travolta at the time was a pretty well-known commodity, thanks to Welcome Back, Kotter. And, how was he to deal with on set? And, as you said, doing those locations.
Travolta was great and a very nice guy. And in fact, when the thing was over, he gave me a Tiffany keychain, pretty nice, with a little, I don't know how you describe it, but a little mirror-like thing, a little charm on it. That had my initials and his initials on it. So that's pretty nice considering who the hell was I. And I'm in that film. And if you look carefully, when the brother is driving away, I am his limo driver, or not driving, probably not limo, but Lincoln Town Car driver.
You also told a small story in the book about how the lovely Pat Kaufman kind of fell for Mr. Travolta and.
Yes, that's right. When Mr. Avildsen was on the case, we would go out to the discotheques, and they didn't open really, or they didn't get lively till after midnight. So we'd go out with Travolta and look at the locations. And I remember that John Travolta and my wife danced at one of these discotheques, and boy, was I jealous because I wanted to dance with John Travolta.
You said it was a great learning experience. What do you think you learned on working on Saturday Night Fever that helped you moving forward doing other film?
Well, I got to work with two great directors, and I think that's the most important thing. I saw how, I saw the issues with John Avildsen, but I also saw how Badham came in and put his own mark on the film, and also had to deal with a very, it was a modest budget. And he made it happen. I think he really brought something, built on something brilliant and made it even more unique. And that was a big deal for me. And also how he managed to put blinders on because there was such mediocrity in the film world. And all these movies that are kind of mainstream, they're just front-loaded with mediocrity and people who care more about the lunch than the little details of a script. and I saw Badham managing to really deal with that kind of stuff.
About how much time did he have to set things up? I mean, into the process? Like, were you guys just about to shoot, or what do you remember about sort of the change of directors? When did that happen?
That's a really good question. I think there was a couple of weeks. I don't think there was a lot of time. Honestly, I really don't recall. Yeah. It just seemed fast.
Well, I mean, obviously, when, the train's rolling and you're working on all these things and then, there's a new captain, running the show. It's obviously, you have to kind of, I guess, improvise and roll with it as it happens, correct?
Well, it went, Badham was the right guy. He made magic, he made it happen. And honestly, it's Norman Wexler and Avildsen's vision with more brilliance to go with it. I've not really discussed that. I wonder what John Avildsen would say about that. That's pretty interesting and I wonder what Badham would say about it. I think that John Badham brilliantly, on very little notice, brought John G. Avildsen's vision with Norman Wexler of Saturday Night Fever, not just to the screen, but to the screen plus added brilliance.
And I mean, for you, working on both of those films, Rocky and then Saturday Night Fever, it must have been like the whole crew, the whole thing kind of got struck by lightning twice because you had two films that became such iconic pieces of film. Obviously, we've talked before about Rocky when that thing took off, but what do you remember about Saturday Night Fever and sort of the reaction to that?
It was kind of the same thing as Rocky. I think they brought it out during sort of a low-key season. I don't think they opened it on Christmas or anything. I think it was kind of almost snuck in there, and the thing just took off. It was amazing. And it was a great film. It was terrific. Both with Rocky and Saturday Night Fever, those are great films. I never for a second, and again, I was really young, so when you're young, anything can happen. You don't look at the downside. You only see the upside. And I honestly, those are the only two movies where I really had learning experiences. I didn't really work on another movie until we were involved in Final Countdown in '79. So those were my film school, and I knew those guys. That both of them, I would have gotten off of Saturday Night Fever if I had not detected very fast that John Badham was major talent. In fact, the reason that I would have gotten out fast is that when I was starting out, I would work for very little, and in exchange for a more significant screen credit, because so everything in the movie business is pretty superficial. So the bigger the credit, the bigger you must be. So I'd forego, being able to get decent wine. I'd get the box wines, but I had the full screen credit, no, half screen credit, depending on what movie it was. And so that's how I got that fancy half screen credit. But basically, I was just a kind of a unit manager type of thing. Oh, and in fact, another lesson for you film people out there about the wonderful world of Hollywood. When Saturday Night Fever was being edited, since I had that half-screen credit, and since Badham's long gone, Avildsen's gone, anyone who knows me is long gone, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I ought to just check on that, make sure that everyone at Paramount is aware that I have a half-screen credit at the end of the movie. And I got in touch with the so-called post-production producer or whatever he was, and he was prepared to screw me. He was prepared to tell me, "Oh no, people in that area, they never get that kind of credit. That's not." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, Mr. So-and-so. I only got half my salary. This was a deal. That's a contract." And he said, "Oh no, these things, no, never. Go to hell. Get lost." And luckily, Ron Stigwood, the nephew of Mr. Robert Stigwood, was still working on the production, and he told that shithead, "Look, buddy, this guy did Lloyd Kaufman was in major way a large part of the team of Saturday Night Fever, and we have a contract, and you better honor it." And thanks to Ron Stigwood, I got that credit. But the Hollywood system would have been perfectly happy to toss me overboard, even with a contract. And then I could have spent 5 years trying to, and it wouldn't have been worth it, I would have dropped it. He knew that, this shithead. And his name is, I can't remember.
That's definitely a good story about, do you think that still works for people today who are starting out, who would, work for less and so they can get a better credit?
I would work for anybody for nothing. I'd almost pay to work because film school is $50,000 a year. if I were starting out, I would get onto any kind of a set I could. But and if I had a free day, work on anything, no matter how wretched. But try to identify talented film directors, and if that's what you want to do, and then do their laundry, whatever it takes. Get in with them, and you'll learn so much. That's my film school. So what if I worked for free, or worked for half price, or worked or paid to work? Again, working with major talent is worth a lot more than paying $50,000 for NYU or UCLA or University of Michigan.
Thanks to Mr. Kaufman for taking the time to talk to us. We'll have links to some of the other episodes where you can hear Uncle Lloyd over at our website, projection-booth.com. We really can't overstate the importance that Saturday Night Fever had and what a cultural phenomenon this was. I mean, we talked earlier about the whole idea of an R-rated movie getting a PG cut so that more people could see it. I mean, really not necessarily done ever, I think, except for this one.
It's the only one I can think of. I mean, I understand like TV cuts and airplane edits and things like that, but I've never heard of them going, we're going to release a different version of the film to theaters. I mean, really? Wow.
Right. This was back in the day when theatrical runs would go on for a long, long time and, come back theatrically. So this is pre-video, of course. So this was such a phenomenon as far as, being held over and everything. I mean, the soundtrack for the film was the number one selling soundtrack in the world for all these years. This is 1977. It finally got bumped out of the top selling soundtrack spot in the early 90s when The Bodyguard came out. But this was huge. This was one of those where it's like, oh yeah, well, Dark Side of the Moon has been on the charts for all these weeks, and Saturday Night Fever. I mean, this thing stayed forever. This double album filled with all these Bee Gees songs and some other songs that necessarily aren't that good. I mean, there's some great songs in here, and I love the Yvonne Elliman song, but some of the stuff, like, it's so bizarre that they would have covers of the songs on the same soundtrack, like the More Than the Woman, Travaris version of it. It's just like, yeah, this really isn't that good, but, you've even got Casey and the Sunshine Band and all this kind of stuff, but, yeah, some great music, and it just was out there forever. And then, of course, as a phenomenon, it is going to get lampooned. So I know, Rob, you said like one of the first times that you saw the iconic white suit wasn't on John Travolta, but it was on Robert Hayes.
Yeah, and I also talk about this scene being also the first time in my youth that I remember someone making a joke about Detroit in a film. And it's an airplane where Robert Hayes is talking about how he met the Julie Haggerty character.
I remember when we first met. It was during the war. I was in the Air Force, stationed in Drambuie off the Barbary coast. I used to hang out at the Magumba Bar. It was a rough place, the seediest dive on the wharf, populated with every reject and cutthroat from Bombay to Calcutta. It's worse than Detroit.
And that was the first time I remember anyone making a joke about my hometown in a film. And then they're in the bar and the fight breaks out and the one person knocks the jukebox and the song comes on, Staying Alive. And he takes off his like, I think he had like an Air Force jacket or something, and he's got the whole white suit on, and then the floor starts with the lights, and then even like the bums are out there disco dancing, and then it just gets ridiculous where he's like swinging her around and everything. It's just a great little parody, and it's been done in other places. There's been little call outs to it here and there, throughout films since 1977, but that probably is the first one because that was 1980.
Well, there were actually there was like a couple films that were inspired by Saturday Night Fever, but yeah, definitely that was the one with the white suit and everything. There was one movie called The Lonely Destiny of John Travolta, which came out in 79, this Italian film, and it was this idea of this John Travolta lookalike. Unfortunately, the only version that I was able to find did not have any subtitles, and I'm not that good at speaking Italian, so I wasn't able to understand all the ins and outs of this movie, but it was fairly intense, and I mean, the whole movie begins at this disco, and instead of it being called Saturday Night Fever, inside of the disco, it's these neon signs that say John's Fever. And there's the light up floor and all this kind of stuff, guy in the white suit, and it's just like, oh wow. And yeah, there's this whole thing with him looking like John Travolta, and he kind of actually does. Luckily, it's not one of these things where it's like, Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger not being able to tell those two apart as twins. This guy actually does look like Travolta, and manages to get into this club and do all this kind of stuff. But yeah, so there's that, and then of course there's so many influences. I mean, Saturday Night Fever kicked off. I mean, there was disco before Saturday Night Fever, but it really brought it into the heartland, and of course there's going to be movie ripoffs and influences galore. If something is popular, we know that there's going to be 15 copies of it out before, the end of the decade.
Well, another thing that I find interesting, and I think this is the one that put it on the map for it being used as a word, and I don't even know if it's even still used as a word. It might be, a generation or two back, was I remember when I was in high school, my high school Spanish teacher said that a version of John Travolta's last name has passed into parlance in South American Spanish slang, and the word is trovoltarse, and it means to be suave or to be a swinger, and I think that this film probably was the thing because it was so international that allowed that to happen. I just remember that from when I was in 3 years of Spanish.
It's interesting that you're saying that that's a South American term, because there was a Chilean film that came out in 2008 called Tony Manero, named after the John Travolta character, and it was set in 78, and it's this guy who's obsessed with John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever, and he's got the suit and all this kind of stuff, and it ended up, I think it was... it ended up being nominated for an Academy Award, if memory serves. And it just, I have only watched part of it so far. I wasn't able to see the whole thing for the podcast, unfortunately. But what I saw, I enjoyed. But it was also one of these, like, older guy who's really, trying to recapture or get in touch with youth culture. It was kind of uncomfortable, and I had just sat through Staying Alive, and I was already very uncomfortable. So I really didn't want to subject myself to more at the moment.
And that white suit, the thing that's interesting for us, film geeks and film geek reviewers like us, was that the white suit eventually was sold at auction and was bought by, of all people, Gene Siskel of Siskel and Ebert, and he had that suit until he died, and I can't remember if it's been auctioned off again or if it's been put somewhere.
It should be at the Siskel Center. They should have it in a case.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they've done that or not, but I know that it was like one of his prized possessions because he absolutely loved Saturday Night Fever. It was such a great film.
As soon as you tell me that somebody buys a suit from a film, I'm picturing them putting it on and seeing Siskel wearing that white suit. It is very humorous to me.
Yeah. It doesn't matter that it's that lovely white suit. It will not make you cool.
No.
Not
to say that Siskel wasn't cool, but
a different kind of cool.
A different kind of cool, yes.
So eventually, Saturday Night Fever, such a big thing. That soundtrack, such a big thing. And this is in the era where, Hollywood was doing some sequels. I mean, there was The Godfather Part 2, There were those Jaws sequels. There was several Rockies. So they eventually decide that about 6 years later, now's the perfect time to do a sequel to Saturday Night Fever.
I used to be pretty incredible myself when I lived in Brooklyn.
Really? What happened?
I moved to Manhattan.
This is Tony Manero. He's got the looks. He's got the guts. He's got the moves. Now, all he needs are the breaks.
Oh, you think that because you're on a show and I'm not, that's competition, right? It ain't competition.
Well, what is it?
Envy.
If he's going to get to the top,
Can you be sure that's ever going to happen?
it's going to take everything he's got.
You want to dance here? You follow my rules. Because I'm going to push you until you think you're going to die.
Paramount Pictures presents John Travolta in a Robert Stigwood production, a Sylvester Stallone film, Staying Alive.
Gotta look out for another one. Set your sights on the stars.
Give me a break. You ain't got the moves for Broadway.
Oh, I ain't got the moves, right? Oh, really?
Never gonna give you up for someone else's love.
I love you, Jackie.
Guys like you aren't relationships. You're exercise.
Woman in you. Bring out the man in me.
If you're hot over somebody, I don't want to always hear about it.
I just respect her dancing, that's all.
Yeah. And her legs and her face and
Come on, the girl's got like an abundance of talent. I've never been asked to leave before.
Oh, don't take it personally.
Well, how can I not? There's nobody else here in the room.
But you can't treat me like this anymore.
I promise it'll never happen again.
What you've got is an anger and an intensity, and that's what I need to make this show work.
No one will ever know you just don't have it.
I got it? You kidding me?
Way to go, Manero!
I need it all 'cause I have brought it over.
It's 5 years later, but the fever still burns. Staying Alive.
Naming itself after the, I can't say title track, but the opening number for Saturday Night Fever, probably...
I would say the iconic track on that.
The iconic track, the song that you think of when you think Saturday Night Fever. Mark, did you get a chance to see Staying Alive?
I tried to watch Staying Alive several times over the last 20 years and have not managed. I've started it. That's all I can say.
So, Rob, you just watched Staying Alive. What did you think of the film?
Let me start here, and then I'll get evil. It makes sense. Just put it that way. In terms of the idea, it makes absolute sense that it's 6 years later. He's in his mid-20s. He's finally moved out of Brooklyn. He's in Manhattan, and he's trying to use the one thing that he's good at, working in that paint store. No, dancing in some way to get somewhere. Great. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Write that script. Well,
and Norman Wexler did.
Yeah.
So, and Wexler came in, wrote that script of a young Tony Manero in Manhattan.
The opening in the credits is it's just a song that's playing, and I'm listening to it. I go,
not just a song.
No, wait a second. I'm listening to it, and I go, I know exactly what this is. I go, just like you were talking about the Action News being from Cool Hand Luke, this song, part of it, was used for sports on Channel 4 in Detroit in the 1980s and 90s. And I'm just like, what are they going to do, sports update now? So anyway, so this is the big piece de resistance, is it? This song that was written by...
you guessed it, Frank Stallone.
Frank Stallone.
Was
there another Stallone involved with this film?
Yeah. See, here's another connection back to Rocky. Sylvester Stallone directed it.
Oh, okay.
Huh. So here you go. Right. So he's not in it. He just directed it. For some reason, Sylvester Stallone thought, "Hey, Why not? I'll direct the sequel, Saturday Night Fever. That'll be great. And then I'll put my kid brother's music on the soundtrack.
I'm not sure how they pronounce it in America, but I think that's called nepotism.
Maybe. But, if it's good nepotism like the Coen brothers, I don't care. If it's good nepotism like the Wachowskis, okay. This isn't good nepotism. So the only thing that was really cool in that opening sequence, so what you get over the credits is the song, and it's a tryout. That's what I get. It's like some sort of like big cattle call dance thing, and Kurtwood Smith. Oh no, it's Kurtwood Smith. I'm like, is he gonna have a role in this? Well, sadly, no. He's only in the credits. He's like a featured extra, and all I could think of is him being like, like in my head as I'm sort of casting this, he could be like the guy who's casting, and he'd be like,
"Can you fly, Bobby?"
Like, oh God, that would be awesome.
Can you fly, Tony?
Can you fly, Tony?
Cut to Tony Manero in the strings flying across the stage.
Bitches leave.
Oh yeah, Clarence Boddicker really would have added something to Staying Alive.
Yeah, so let's get in the plot a little bit. Like I said, we come to understand this is Tony Manero. It's 6 years later. He's in his mid-20s, and he's trying out for all these roles on Broadway. And he's got a girlfriend, but it seems like the end of Saturday Night Fever like never happened. Like he never learned his lesson. Like the whole idea was at the end is like, yeah, I can be friends with a woman. Okay, so we thought, okay, maybe in 6 years he's grown up a little bit. No, he's a liar and he's a misogynist. It's just terrible. He's still up to his old tricks. But the one thing that I find interesting is he is doing these odd jobs like a lot of actors do when they're starting out. And he works in a club, and that first club scene is almost like the Funhouse Mirror version of the first scene in Saturday Night Fever, where he goes to the club. When he goes to the club in Saturday Night Fever, it's like all the women are on him. And he's like, oh, yeah, where he's on all the women kind of thing. Like you get the idea that, like all these women are his, and he's like, he's there and he can kind of do whatever he wants. And here it's like all the women are on him, and he's just like, go away. I don't want you. Go away. He's just like shooing them all off. So for me, it was kind of this bizarro world version of what we kind of come to expect in some ways, although certain things do carry over.
Well, picking up on that, I mean, I talked about how when he shows up at 2001 Odyssey, that the crowd parts for him. And in this, he's there as a waiter trying to get through, and a guy bumps him and he knocks over the glass. So Tony is kind of a schlub. He doesn't get picked for the audition. He is working at this low-class dance studio, which feels it seems like it's along the same lines as the dance studio where he was in Saturday Night Fever, and he's basically become that little shrimpy guy who is running the place, and not even. I mean, he's a cog in the wheel. He's one of the instructors, and he's getting yelled at right out of the gate because he's late for his class because he was doing the audition. And then we see him at the club, and yeah, he's a waiter now. He's not the star when he comes in. He's just a dude. And so it's a little sad to see him transformed in that way and not transformed personality-wise, because he's got nothing going for him. Before he had his dance and all that kind of stuff, and people loved to watch him dance, and he was this star. He's a star in Brooklyn, and he comes to Manhattan, and now he's just orders spaghetti, and he gets egg noodles with ketchup.
Well, the other thing that I noticed in here is he then goes, I think he goes to this show. He goes to this Broadway show, this big dance number and all this. And he becomes fixated on this one woman who's dancer in the show. I wrote down in my notes that I go, in this era, Scorsese shows desire through slow-mo. I'm like, Stallone shows it through multi-exposure and lens flares going wild. And he's watching her, and it's just like there's like 4 different images of her, and then there's these sort of like the lights have this like star pattern kind of thing shooting off them and everything. It's really kind of like overly done. And then we learn that he does have a girlfriend, but he goes backstage to try and pick this woman up, and she's British, and she's not falling for any of his stuff, and like shuts the door in his face and everything. And it eventually becomes sort of this balancing act for him between the dream girl that he wants, or at least he thinks he wants, and his girlfriend who he's with, who he kind of treats poorly, to say the least. And this double standard issue that he has, where his girlfriend starts to get interested in Frank Stallone, who's in her band. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you going out with him? And he's like all jealous of his girlfriend, but at the same time, he's doing the same thing to her and doesn't expect her to get upset.
Really, a lot of this stuff is this kind of funhouse mirror of the previous film, because in that we had the two women, and we had the more upper class Stephanie, and in this it's the Finola Hughes. I think her name is Laura in this, but I would say that. Cynthia Rhodes as Jackie, she doesn't necessarily have the same balls that Annette had in the previous film. So it's just like, okay, this is kind of weird. She definitely feels much more like a doormat. And there is this weird double standard. And then what doesn't help the movie either is that this is 1983 and just everything is so 1980s in this film. So like Finola Hughes, it's a beautiful, beautiful woman, but she just looks terrible in this movie with the way that her hair is done and the headbands and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was just really tough to watch when it came to that kind of stuff. I mean, and we're, 30 years removed from this era of everything, but it was still just like, oh my God, this is so tacky.
The other issue I kept having, even though I had to keep reminding myself it was 1983, was that for some reason I kept thinking it was earlier. Like it was like 81 or something. I don't know why I kept thinking that, but it just seemed like there was something about it that, like I said, is so early 80s. Like I said, the idea isn't bad. It's not a bad idea. It's just that it's poorly executed, and it seems like Stallone used it as a vehicle for his brother, for his music career. And this was like right after First Blood, which is amazing to me because like First Blood's 82? So he must have went like off First Blood, did this movie. You want to talk about a completely different change? He's not even in front of the camera on this, and so things progress, and he's sort of balancing these two women. He gets cast in this big show,
Satan's Alleyway.
Oh fuck, Gates of Hell or something. I don't know what the hell they were talking about, but it's like the last 15 minutes of the film is this giant crappy Cirque du Soleil show or something. I don't even know how to like give you a comparable.
It was like the ice show at the end of Death to Smoochie, but the Death to Smoochie one made so much more sense, and it was a retelling of the film.
And it was much more entertaining. So he's in the show, and then he starts ad-libbing, and he does a solo dance, and the director's like, he's not supposed to do this, and like everybody goes crazy. And the other thing in there too is his mom comes back. Now the rest of his family, they've all died in a horrible bus accident or something. Who knows where the hell they are? Because it's never mentioned. But his mom comes to the show, and there's even a scene earlier where he goes back home and he apologizes to his mom for basically being a dick when he was a kid. But it doesn't seem like he's grown at all. It seems like he's still the same person from the earlier part from the other film. It's not like he had some big epiphany. He's like, oh yeah, I really shouldn't two-time my girlfriend, and and I shouldn't, I should be a better person. No. But for some reason, he finds it in his heart to go home and tell his mom he's sorry for being an asshole.
Yeah, it just feels completely tacked on there. I mean, we know, and we have talked about Stallone having so much talent, especially at this period of his career and everything, and, him writing the screenplay for Rocky and, doing such a good job when it came to some of these things. He directed Rocky 2, Rocky 3, just this film, it's like, what? But I will say that the original screenplay didn't have a lot of stuff going for it either. I mean, the thing about Staying Alive, either as screenplay or final film, there's not a whole lot of story here. As we're trying to describe what happens in the film, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on. It's
basically, we described it already. That's it.
It's Manero bouncing between these two ladies.
Yeah.
And that's really all you had in the...
And going out for auditions to be a dancer. That's it.
I will say that the screenplay almost takes place before Staying Alive, the movie, because it's it's this whole thing of them trying to convince Tony to start auditioning for stuff. It's like he refuses to audition for things. He doesn't want to be rejected. But again, it's just there's not a whole lot of stuff going on. It's much more of Tony working at that nightclub. There's this girl there that it's not even like he's going out with either of the girls, which is kind of weird. And the one girl who would eventually be the Cynthia Rhodes character, she's kind of a floozy, and she ends up disappearing for a while, and they find out that she was out selling herself and all this kind of stuff. And then the other girl is kind of, highfalutin and everything. So again, kind of going back to that Stephanie character, not quite as distant as the Finola Hughes character, but at one point she takes Tony out to her parents' place, and they have dinner with her mom and dad, and her dad is the psychologist, and you can tell that she's just rebelling against her dad. And there's this whole dialogue where the dad actually likes Tony because he, doesn't pull any punches. He's very crass and everything, but the father just kind of gets off on it. But Tony realizes, like, basically you're using me as this, circus monkey to go out and shock your parents. So the Tony of that screenplay is much more thought out, but again, just not a whole lot of stuff happens. The whole idea of the Cynthia Rhodes character being in a band and all that kind of stuff, not there at all. I mean, you can boil the Wexler screenplay down into Tony Manero works at a nightclub, and there's two women in the screenplay. That's it. And then you take the movie, and it is so different. I mean, this is Stallone rewriting it from the ground up.
That was the one thing I put in my notes. I said, too much dancing, not enough story. And that's really, to be honest, the problem.
And it's not the good kind of dancing. It's not like with Saturday Night Fever, man. It's like, comparing it to like, a musical or even like a porn film or something where you get those, the dance scenes are like the climaxes, and you go through the story of Saturday Night Fever, blah, 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 and you get to a dance scene and you get to see John Travolta being fucking awesome out there on the dance floor. And then you get more Saturday Night Fever. And I'm not discounting how great Saturday Night Fever is. I'm just saying, as far as the pacing and the plotting goes, it's just like every X number of minutes you're getting another dance scene, and you're seeing how Travolta is just doing his thing, and you're reminding the audience how great this guy is, at least in one area, that he's a shit. He just does all these bad things, but when he gets out on the dance floor, he's just amazing. And you're giving us that every so often so that we remember why we're kind of following this character. You don't get that in Staying Alive. I mean, he's just you get him auditioning and trying out, but you never get to see like him cut loose and just be awesome until that end scene, and you're just like, this is more embarrassing than awesome. I mean, him in that like weird loincloth and the little headband and stuff, it's just like, what is this? This is horrible.
And you're a big musical fan, so the only thing I can think of in relation to the story with this, and I've never seen it, so I'm just going on what I've heard or what people have told me, is that maybe it's like a chorus line because it's all like backstage drama.
Yeah, I've never seen a chorus line, but yeah, that's what I understand it is as well, is seeing the making of a musical.
Yeah, which, like I said, it's these insufferable dance auditions. He goes out for these things and he's dancing, but it's not the dancing that you got in Saturday Night Fever. It's a much more, choreographed, like a musical, it's just real simple. I mean, it's like if you've seen a musical and you've seen a member of the dance company or whatever, the chorus or whatever that's in the musical, that's what you're getting. How exciting is that? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be all that exciting.
You can make it exciting. I mean, you can make this stuff compelling, but it wasn't that way. I mean, I watch So You Think You Can Dance, and I watch it from the beginning of the season every year because I love the whole idea, the tryouts and the drama and all this kind of stuff. I've seen Fame. We talked about Bobby C., that actor being in Fame, so you get to see that kind of, the dance school and all that kind of stuff. But it just didn't hold my interest, and I didn't care what they were doing either in the theater or outside the theater. And, it's like when I even, to go back to the music thing again, looking at the soundtrack, I see like a half, this was a single album as opposed to a double album, and one half of the album is the Bee Gees. I don't remember the Bee Gees songs in this movie at all. I just remember the second half of the soundtrack, which is all fucking Frank Stallone songs. And it's just like every fucking song, Far From Over, Look Out for Number One, Finding Out the Hard Way, all this stuff. And it's just like, holy shit, this is just a vehicle for Frank fucking Stallone.
There's only one Bee Gees song that I can think of that's in this film. And it comes at the very end. And what it is, and what it is that he's kicked ass in this big, musical, and he goes to the door at the end.
What I want to do? What? You know what I want to do? What? Strut.
So he opens the door and he redoes through Times Square, in the theater district, the opening of Saturday Night Fever to Staying Alive.
Just embarrassing.
And the one thing that I can see that this film was actually an inspiration for, and you may agree with me on this, is at several times in the film, and it may even just be the opening credits, is the song and the way it's cut reminded me of the South Park montage. Because you got to have a montage, all that, you got working hard, you're doing all this stuff, they put that on the show, and then also in Team America. And it almost seemed like maybe they saw this movie and that's where they got that idea from, because it sounds like it. That's what they're really making fun of is, and maybe this is where that, stupid joke about the 80s montage comes from.
Oh, yeah, when he says strut, and I know that Stallone was probably just like, this is where the audience is going to stand up and cheer. This is the callback to the first movie, but, oh, yeah, just so embarrassing, man. It was just, it hurt. And what I hate is that song is so good that I'm just like, yeah, I love this song when it finally comes on, because they just have given you this shitty music through so much of this, and it's just like, oh, and then finally that song comes on. I'm like, all right, yeah, this was one of the most successful films of 1983. 1984, people talk about how 1984 was the golden, year when it came to the 80s, and you got, Ghostbusters and all this shit. Not to say that Ghostbusters is shit, just going on the record, but this was one of the top grossers of 83, and it's just amazing because now people look back at this as one of the worst sequels ever. And I won't say that it's one of the worst sequels ever. I've seen Highlander 2, The Quickening, but this is pretty bad, especially talking about how great the first film is, all these juicy roles for actors and how, so compelling it is, and you have this character that you shouldn't like, but you follow this guy around. Great stuff. And then you get to this and it's just like, why am I spending an hour and a half with this Tony Manero? I really don't care about this guy. I mean, it's Travolta, so he's compelling. He's got the charisma and everything. But I just, it's tough, man. Like Mark was saying, I have started this movie a ton of times. I've only made it through once. I couldn't even rewatch this one for the podcast. It was just too tough.
Well, you sent it to me. The file didn't work. And you said, well, just watch 54. Don't worry about it. If you don't have time to watch Staying Alive, it's okay. So I told you, well, I've got time and I want to watch it. So you found another file and you sent it to me. And I watched it. Oh, man. I never need to see this one again.
No. I don't think anybody really needs to ever check this movie out. Just stay away.
And stay away and stay alive. That's all I got to say.
It almost feels like 54 is much more of a sequel to Saturday Night Fever than Staying Alive is. Mark, tell us about, how did 54 come about?
Well, first of all, that's a huge compliment.
Well, good. I'm glad you take it that way.
Yeah, that's an enormous compliment. But, really, how did 54 come about? A couple of ways. I think in my head, I thought, I want to make a nostalgia movie. I was in graduate school, and I thought, I want to make a nostalgia movie about the disco in the 70s. And I thought, 15 years later, I'm going to do sort of like an American Graffiti for the disco era. And then one of my teachers was the filmmaker Paul Schrader, who was part of that second golden age of Hollywood and is still working. And he said, I think you should set it at Studio 54. And that is what totally got this thing going, because to me, Studio 54, growing up in the middle of nowhere, was this legend that I think we all know about, whether you grew up in Detroit or an Iowa farm or Malibu or in Saudi Arabia. You knew what Studio 54 was. And so that's where it really started going. And then what I realized quickly was, my way into it was through the kids who worked there, because I waited a lot of tables as a college student, and I loved that kind of family dynamic that's created. And so at the time when I was writing the script and it got off the ground, it was the world was ripe for a Studio 54 movie, and there were probably 15 other scripts out there, many of them with huge directors attached to them or huge writers had written them. But I think mine was the one that got made because it was about the hoi polloi. It was about the everyman. Sort of like you were talking about how we were talking about Saturday Night Fever being about working class folk. So that was an entree into disco. In the same way, it being about Shane O'Shea, working class kid from New Jersey, and his working class, friends, the bartender, coat check girl, and busboy, that it's about the worker bees. So you meet the fabulous and rich people, but they're on the periphery. It's really about the kids who worked there and that working class thing. So in that way, I think I owe my filmos a lot to Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, because Last Days of Disco came out the same year, right?
Yeah, right about the same time. Yep.
Okay, I still haven't seen that one. I mean, because as soon as I read that it was a Wood Stillman film, I was like, no thanks. Apologies to Mr. Stillman, but I sat through Metropolitan. I think I hacked through half of Barcelona, and he's one of the most bloodless filmmakers to me. So I just didn't do it. But I will tell you, Mark, that I saw 54. I was working at a web design company, and a whole troop of us went down the street. We were in Birmingham, Michigan. We went down to the Birmingham Theater. This is still the Birmingham 8, just so Rob can get a picture of this in his head. And we all sat there and we watched 54. And so it was a really nice afternoon. We took off the afternoon from work and went to see 54. So it was a really nice time. And it was like, yeah. And it was shortly thereafter that I remember hearing, I was really into tape trading and all this kind of stuff. And it was shortly thereafter that a 54 work print hit my radar, and that it was so different from the version that was released. Now, I've read that the DVD, kind of talking about Saturday Night Fever and how Saturday Night Fever, the DVD is different than what we see normally, or the AMC cut or all this kind of stuff. The DVD of 54 is different than the version that I saw when I saw it at theaters. And then there's another version that's still out there?
Well, so there are many versions of this movie because the studio cut it so much that they realized they made a mistake after they released it, and they started adding things back. So you have, first of all, the movie. I think the VHS version is the movie. Then I think the DVD might have a little more. Then the French version has a little more. Then there's something called the extended cut, which is really just like 3 or 4 years old. But it's still that same story. It's still that same sort of, almost, to me, it's kind of a music video almost, the way they cut it. It was reshot to be about the Ryan Phillippe character and the Neve Campbell character instead of what the movie originally was about, which was the Ryan Phillippe, Breckin Meyer, and Salma Hayek characters. That's what the original movie is, and that's the movie that's about to premiere at Berlin. So it isn't just a director's cut in that, there are a few scenes that are different, a few scenes added back. It's actually almost a third different. So it's I think something like 37 minutes of footage. We cut back out the reshoots and restored the movie, which was this very complicated process technically as well. Restoring a 17-year-old movie from a library that's changed hands 3 times. And now you have, I think the movie comes in at 106 minutes total, but I don't think we have any of the reshoots in it whatsoever. And, we've got almost 40 minutes back of the original story. So my producer of the original movie actually likes to refer to my cut, the movie that's finally going to come out, as 54, and the studio cut that came out, in 1998 as 55.
How did you get this opportunity to go back and recut this after all these years?
Persistence and tenacity, and a man named Jonathan King, who is the producer of the director's cut with me. And he, at every opportunity, he would talk to people at Miramax, especially every time the library changed hands. And he found a sympathetic ear in Zan Devine, who is the head of Miramax now. And she thought it was a fabulous idea, and she said yes. And so, we got our tiny budget. We thought we can make it work, and we have made it work. Little did we know, finding the footage that had been spread out all over the world and finding the negative, who knew that my post-production supervisor would be crawling around 90-degree warehouses and finding our dailies on a pallet that was marked to be destroyed.
Oh, man.
Wow. Had she not found them, literally that day, there would be no director's cut.
Wow. You snatched this out of the fire, literally.
Nancy Valley, the goddess, snatched this out of the fire by crawling on her hands and knees through a dusty warehouse in the Grapevine.
So after this shows in Berlin, are there plans to put out your version to some sort of format so folks like us get a chance to see it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So what will happen is we'll have a few more screenings, and it will then it will, be available on VOD and iTunes, et cetera, eventually, probably later in the spring. But it will continue to play at festivals also. So hopefully, I don't know if there's a festival in Detroit that would be interested, but we have a company called Park Circus, who is taking care of that aspect of it. And that's what's really exciting about this, that finally I get to go out with this movie to the film festivals and present it to people and have it also accessible to people online and in various other formats.
Well, I'm glad you're around to do it, and this isn't sort of this is what we thought Orson would have liked for Touch of Evil. You actually had the chance to put it together yourself.
Thank you, and that's what's so interesting is, most director's cuts like this only happen with very famous movies or very famous directors like Orson Welles. So the fact that I have this opportunity, the movie's not that famous, and I'm certainly not famous. So it's really a special situation, and I feel incredibly lucky and incredibly grateful to the new Miramax.
I have a hard time believing that this was your first film. Your first feature film was this, to me, was a big deal, taking the afternoon off and going to see it at work and everything. And just the cast that you had in here, you mentioned, Ryan Felipe and Selma Hayek, Nev Campbell, just Breckin Meyer, some great names in here. This is the first time that I remember seeing Mark Ruffalo in something. It was just how were you able to pull this thing off as such a young filmmaker?
Well, see, this is what's interesting. This was the time of the queer new wave, and I was part of that queer new wave in the early 90s because I'd made short films in graduate school, and they did incredibly well, and they touched nerves, and so I had sort of a festival career already because of these short films. One's called The Dead Boys Club, and the other is called Alkali, Iowa, and they... Miramax was very aware of these movies, and, they were very after work, they were very interested in working with young filmmakers, and in my telling of this, my version of Studio 54, how I wanted to tell my story. And then, I was just a gutsy little thing who fought for a year for the cast I got. I mean, they were throwing people at me for the Mike Myers role that you would not even believe, or for the Salma Hayek role. She's a Latina, right? They were throwing all these blonde girls at me, and I just dug in my heels on my cast every step of the way. And after a year of, some fairly intense discussions, I felt like I had this wonderful cast. And then what happened while we were shooting was my cast started getting really famous. So Ryan came out with I Know What You Did Last Summer. And I remember we had to shoot in Toronto a lot. We built the club in Toronto and we shot up there. And I remember once waking up in Toronto to my clock radio, and it was Ryan screaming on a commercial for I Know What You Did Last Summer. I jumped out of bed. Ryan screaming. Wait, what? And so also Mike had a lot of success on Saturday Night Live and with, his first couple of movies. But the real sensation for Mike was when Austin Powers was released on either VHS or DVD and became this huge sensation. So he was getting bigger. Nev had Scream 2 or 3 coming out. Salma had something. And, this was Mark's first role. I found him in a play. It's not his first role in a movie, but his first role in a big movie. And I found him in a play in the small theater in New York. And so it's just like the cast just started becoming huge while we were shooting, which really made Miramax so excited about the movie, but then wanted to turn it into something else instead of the dark, fucked up Saturday Night Fever type of movie that it started out to be.
Like you said, just that cast is great, and Mike Myers in here is so good as Steve Rubell. I mean, I've seen him in other things, and I've seen him in dramas and stuff, but sometimes there's sort of this, I'm Mike Myers playing this guy kind of thing. You kind of get this secondary kind of thing with him sometimes, but in here, it's like he's in it. He's just so good and so dead on. Yeah, I'm thrilled with his performance. I think he and I are both really happy with it. And, I always want to do rehearsal, even if I get him for a day. With Mike, I had him for 3 weeks, and he came in, he said, I got to tell you, I'm going to be just awful at the beginning, but believe me, by the time I'm on set, I'm going to be good. Just trust me. And he was absolutely right. And a lot of our rehearsal time was just spent just talking about the character and talking about the times. But we did, all sorts of things. And then when he got his prosthetics, it really turned him into this character. And the interesting thing about casting him, this was funny. We were really getting close to making this movie, but we still didn't have the Steve Rubell character cast. And it was the plum role in the movie. So we knew we could get a movie star. But, I wanted the right one. So we did not send the script to Mike, but Mike got it somehow and approached us. And Miramax was thinking, oh, Mark will never say yes to him. And I immediately said yes, because there's a tragic aspect to this character of Steve Rubell, and yet he's funny. And I knew, we know this from many comedians. A lot of their comedy comes from this tragic place. And so I just somehow instinctually knew Mike would be great. I did a little more homework, watched more of his stuff. And, by the time we met, we both knew it was sort of a fait accompli. So if we didn't bite each other's heads off, it was going to work. And it did. So I'm very, very pleased with that. And thank you for mentioning.
Yeah, when he showed up in Inglourious Bastards, I kept waiting for him to behave kind of thing. But seeing him again in 54, it was just like, oh, wow, yeah, I forgot he was even in this, because he plays that role so perfectly, and you do forget that it's Mike Myers. You don't expect him to come out with that kind of shtick or anything. He just is that character so great, and the prosthetics help and everything, but he just, is playing that character 100%. It doesn't feel like there's another person in there. It just feels like Rubell the entire time. It's the same kind of era, and it reminded me of the performance in a way of when Burt Reynolds was in Boogie Nights. That you have this guy who has this, this behind him, you know what I mean? Like, people expect a certain thing, and then he shows up, and it just, you're like, wow, and that's really what it did for me. Mike was really on the road to getting an Oscar nomination here. In fact, the Miramax publicity machine was already making that happen. And before the film got cut, he was nominated for New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Supporting Actor. So, man, it was happening. And then when the New York Film Critics saw the cut version, they pulled the nomination. It was so heartbreaking. Yeah, that movie. Yeah. did you need to go back and like loop anything or recontact any of the people that were in this originally, or are you able to do this completely kind of with the original elements that you have?
One very important person, Ryan, who, by the way, is just a wonderful, wonderful person. I love this guy very much. It was his first lead and my first feature, as you guys mentioned. And so I think we have that sort of bonding experience. I think that happens between a first-time director and a first lead actor thing. And so after not being in touch with him, maybe running into him at parties here and there over the years, I hadn't been in touch with him for a couple of years, and I wanted to rewrite the voiceover. So in 55, there's this long voiceover that goes throughout it. I did not write it. I did not like it, but I still wanted a beginning voiceover, right? To take us to kind of take us back into 1979. So I rewrote it. And it's just, at the top of the movie. And what I realized was this is a tiny, tiny little bit of cinema history. I don't think this has happened before. You guys can probably correct me, or one of your listeners can. But I don't think ever before has an actor been able to look back 20 years, literally, when they do their voiceover. So Ryan redid the voiceover as a 40-year-old man looking back on what it was like to be 19. And it's kind of amazing. It's a little bit like Boyhood, that there's this weird sense of reality. And it's not like you're going to notice it in the writing or in what he's saying. But when I talked to Ryan about that, when we were redoing the voiceover, it's like the whole cadence of his voice changed and all. And it's like, this is an amazing opportunity for me and for an actor, and I think hopefully for an audience, to have a real 40-year-old look back 20 years.
No, that's remarkable. That's like getting Will Wheaton to do Richard Dreyfuss's lines in Stand By Me or something, just go back and do the voiceover of him looking at his youth, right. That would be amazing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think there is a certain amount of anticipation for this cut. And I think, one thing I think people might think they're going to see this amazing, hedonistic, sexy, violent, drug-addled movie. Well, the truth of the matter is, there is, yes, it's much sexier and there's drug use and whatnot, and yes, you should come and see that. But it's also, in a way, a quieter movie and a more melancholy movie. And it shares that melancholy with Saturday Night Fever, I think. I hope people will find. Just, setting expectations sort of in that place, because, when things get cut, I think people often start to wonder what was there. And had you seen it in 1998, it would have been much edgier. Now it seems like something you would see. It was like it was a little ahead of its time. Now it won't push the envelope, but it is sort of in the envelope of this time right now. And so that's why I think why Miramax decided to release it now also, because they felt like, now's the time for this, because these sort of anti-heroes like Tony Manero, like the Ryan Phillippe character in the original cut, like now we can watch these sort of imperfect characters. We like, imperfect characters, flawed characters. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons it's finally getting released.
All right, we are going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
That's right. We're back next week with a discussion on Federico Fellini's Juliet of the Spirits, and we'll be joined by our good friend Jim Tuschinski. But before we go, I want to thank this week's special guest co-host, Mark Christopher. And as you said, we're very excited that your version of 54 is coming out soon. And Mark, where can people go to find out more information about what you're up to if they're interested, and also these screenings?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure. Well, so the film is premiering at Berlin on February 10th. Afterwards, we'll be having other screenings both in the U.S. and abroad. And I don't have a release date yet on VOD and iTunes, etc., but it should be later in the spring. So I think good old Google is where we find out right now, because, as I said, Miramax has not landed on the release date yet.
You said that there's a company. Is it Miramax is putting it out, and this other company is assisting? Is there a website or anywhere to learn anything more about them?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Yes, they're called Park Circus, and if you Google Park Circus, you can get a hold of them there. Jack Bell is the lead person on this project at Park Circus, but they are taking charge of the festival aspect of it.
Well, very cool. We'll keep up with the release dates and everything and post those over at our Facebook group and make sure that folks know that if it's coming to their town that they will be able to see this, or when it hits VOD, iTunes, all that kind of fun stuff. We'll have those links available too. And go ahead, sign up for our Facebook group over at our website, projection-booth.com. So thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Projection Booth. We hope you'll do us a solid, go over to iTunes and give us a nice review, give us some stars, we'll appreciate it. Now, gentlemen, it is time to strut.
Your time. this is the end. You made your choice and now my chance is over. I thought I was in. You put me down and say I'm going nowhere. Save me, darling. I am down, but I am far from over. Give me something. I need it all. So wish it away. But his mouth won't shut, he still shakes his butt. Cause he's Fiddler and Swayze and Trumpet.
And finally, the #1 selling doll this Christmas is Tickle Me Elmo. And the least popular selling doll? You guessed it, Tickle Me Frank Stallone.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.